Welcome back to Conservative Conversations. I'm your host, Reid.
And I'm Frank.
Today we're going to be talking about the 2024 election cycle and some right-wing conspiracies. And let's get into it. Before we get started, listeners, I want to remind you to please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And you can also subscribe on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can make a donation on our Red Circle page. All links are in the description. And we're going to start with some 2024 election cycle talk. I was recently listening to another Fox News Rundown podcast. And they had on the governor of West Virginia, Jim Justice.
Oh, cool.
Yes, who is running for Joe Manchin's Senate seat in 2024.
Really?
Yes, so that's part of what I was going to talk about today is how, that sort of did remind me that not only is it a big presidential election, we also have more Senate and House elections that we have to kind of worry about too. And this race is kind of a big one, the race for the West Virginia Senate seat, because currently Joe Manchin holds a seat, and he's the one up for election, and he's a Democrat, and Jim Justice is a Republican governor of West Virginia, and so if Jim Justice were to win, that would add one more Senate seat back to the Republican side.
Yep.
And we'd really only need one more. And I haven't gotten around to look at what all races were going to be going on for 2024 yet. Maybe that's something I'll do for the next episode. But I kind of think that Jim Justice has a pretty good shot at getting the the Senate seat for the Republicans.
I'm sure he has a lot better of a shot than that Massey fella.
It's Alex Mooney who he's running against.
No, but I mean, remember, it was only, probably 4 years ago or 6 years ago?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay,
Patrick Morrissey. That was his name.
Yeah.
Patrick Morrissey.
I get what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of the things that the host, I think it was Fox's host, Dave Anthony, who usually does like their radio and their podcast shows. He asked him about how, or not how, but how West Virginia has, how West Virginia has changed to be a Republican state.
Yeah.
Because back in 92, I believe, I think it was 92, maybe it was Clinton's 96 re-election race, I can't remember which one. But West Virginia voted for him, I think just over 50-something%. And then they voted for Trump, it was like 68%.
Yeah.
So, and they definitely have changed in as far as the way they vote, I would say, because, being from West Virginia, I think generally speaking, the people are conservative people.
Yeah,
it's
I
just
think in
for
nature.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, nature. But for some reason, they were convinced or taught to vote for the Democrat Party for years and years and years.
Well, I also believe that the dynamics have changed over the years,
Mm-hmm.
and that maybe not in certain areas so much,
Sure.
but there's a lot of areas that have totally grown up, like, that you wouldn't believe. I mean, I grew up in the Charleston area of
Mm-hmm.
West Virginia, and down going towards Huntington on 64,
Mm-hmm.
from Charleston to Huntington, it used to be a lot of just... what would you say? Empty space, really?
Sure.
I mean, I want to say that. Just valleys and
Right.
and land,
Yeah.
undeveloped land. And now there are towns that exist along 64 that weren't really there before. I mean, there was a Scott Depot, but it was like a field.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was like an exit off of the. Now there's a full blown city
Yeah.
in Scott Depot.
Right.
And Winfield has grown up right beside it, taking on more people and the surrounding towns and everything. I mean, it's just amazing some of the growth that's happened in
Yeah.
West Virginia.
That's one of the things that Jim Justice pointed out, how well they've really been able to kind of turn their economy around.
Yeah.
And despite the challenges it does have,
Right.
like one of them being like the coal industry that it used to rely on so heavily is just not what it used to be, and it's can't really support the state by itself anymore, or
Right.
not by itself, but in the way it used to.
Right.
But I think it'll be an interesting race, and that kind of brings me to part of my other point of the 2024 subject, is that one of the other things Dave Anthony and Jim Justice were talking about is this No Labels group. Have you heard about them?
No.
No?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. Well, it's some, I don't know what term they're either nonpartisan or bipartisan group. But it's contains several different people. It's like an organization, and they're potentially going to run a third-party candidate. And one of the big names that they're considering is Joe Manchin.
Oh.
Right? Because
Maybe I have heard something about that.
and what was I getting ready to say? Oh, because Joe Manchin hasn't yet confirmed. He's being really wishy-washy about it, whether he's either going to run for his Senate seat again or run for the president.
Oh my goodness.
Right? I mean, if there is going to be a third party, I wouldn't mind seeing old Joe Manchin try for it. It'd be a way to go out, as Jim Justice says in this interview. And I think that's probably not unlikely.
So you think you'd vote for him?
Oh no, I don't. No, I don't think I'd vote for him. I'm just saying I think if if there is gonna be some big kind of third party push this time, I wouldn't mind seeing him try for it. I wouldn't vote for him. Probably.
I seem to remember something from history about a president who ran or something like that. So some guy who ran for president, and he didn't even get all the votes of his state, but he did get the votes from one state, but it wasn't his home state.
Right.
How do you like that? And he only got one state that voted for him. I feel like that'd be funny if it was like Joe, like only West Virginia voted for him, or like nobody else ever heard of the guy.
Yeah. But I think it'd definitely be an interesting shakeup because a lot of places keep talking about polls showing that a lot of voters aren't really interested in a Biden-Trump rematch. So that's one of the big things that this No Labels group is kind of leaning on. But I don't know. I don't think we'd really see a third party win. But definitely be an interesting shakeup to see.
I don't know. I don't know about the whole thing.
Right, I don't really either.
The whole thing's shaking out funny to me. I mean,
Well, there's a lot going on.
all right. So, I guess to move on to my stuff, the first thing to talk about was I saw some interesting testimony given by this lady, Emma Jo Morris, who is a politics editor at Breitbart, and she's the former editor at the New York Post. And I believe that the testimony that she's giving comes from her time at the Post. And anyway, so this was congressional testimony she was giving before the White House Weaponization Committee about censorship and specifically censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story, quote unquote, the laptop from hell. Which is interesting because it sort of is a follow-up to our last episode 55, where we were discussing how the White House and the big tech companies were like colluding to suppress stories such as this.
Right, yep.
So anyway, she gets up there. What's particularly funny, there's a particular clip that's really funny because first of all, you have to remember back that this story, when she was coming out with this, supposedly she cracked the story with the New York Post, if I'm recalling that correctly. Okay. But she was first to write about this, and it was put out at the time by some pretty high people in some pretty high places that this was total garbage, that this was Russian disinformation, that this was a planted story,
like
it's a false story.
Former security people, whatever.
Yeah.
National security experts or something like that.
Well, I also love this story because you'll see this is sort of a running theme with what I have to say today, but it's like a trip down memory lane when I heard some of these names.
Okay.
People like Clapper and Comey, and there's another one I know there. I just didn't want to have to replay the whole thing again to get this, but she's just naming some people like that, those guys high up in like the FBI and stuff like that, the intelligence people, whatever.
Right.
They literally, despite the fact that they had just been dragged through the mud with all that Trump Russia collusion stuff,
right,
they signed this letter or whatever stating that her story was, they've basically like an affidavit saying that her story was just a conspiracy theory. And they've basically been harping on that to this day. I mean, that's their story and they're sticking to it. It's a conspiracy theory.
Well, that's what they said just recently when we were talking about the case with big tech collusion. When the reporters ask about it, it's a conspiracy.
Well, anytime you hit them with the truth,
the
truth is a conspiracy.
Yeah,
they just spin it around
in their eyes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Right.
I'm going to link specifically the clip that's so really good. I mean, because this lady just totally laughs when she brings up Clapper's name and Comey's name and whoever these people that she lifts out.
Right.
She just can't hold it in. She's laughing. And I get the feeling that she's probably, or maybe used to be, a little more left of center. I mean, I don't know. I don't know exactly. I didn't really look at her politics or whatever, but
right.
I just think it's funny how they'll tear down anybody, these big people. Doesn't matter who you write for, how big your name is, how much clout you have.
Right. Well, none of those 50 some odd people who signed that letter are gonna reap any consequences of basically lying. And that's what they did, because it turned out the collusion wasn't any kind of Trump-Russia collusion. It was the Hillary collusion.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that. Because to move on to my other thing, were you done? The Hillary collusion.
I guess pretty much I was just saying that none of those people are going to face any kind of consequences.
What does it matter now?
Yeah, essentially. Because they're all friends with the media. The media's going to have them back on, despite the fact they totally made up stuff.
Yeah.
And the government's certainly not going to do anything about it, because I don't think it's really a crime that they committed. I don't really see how it would be.
Well, it's like falsifying documents, falsifying evidence, false reporting. I don't see how that's not a crime. Falsifying federal documents? There's gotta be some kind of statute for that.
I don't know. Don't know, but either way, they're not going to see any kind of punishment for even if it is a crime.
Misrepresenting the federal government to the people? There's some kind of crime there, for sure. But anyway, it's funny that you should mention the Hillary thing, because the other thing I was going to talk about is I found this new podcast. This isn't really a plug, but I'd never seen it before, called the PBD Podcast. And they had Anthony Weiner on. Yeah, another blast from the past. Anthony Weiner. Remember him?
Yeah.
Well, they had him on. And they did some talking about the 2024 cycle and stuff. They did a lot of talking. I guess Anthony Weiner's tried to combat a lot of what that Kennedy who's running says and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And what's that Kennedy?
Robert.
Yeah. What are his initials?
RFK Jr.
RFK, yeah. Apparently he's been putting out a lot of stuff. He does some kind of podcast. He has his own podcast, Anthony Weiner does, or whatever, or something. And,
can't imagine what goes on in that
right.
podcast.
And he puts stuff out. He writes stuff.
I bet he does put stuff out.
Yeah, well. You'll see that's going to come up here in a minute, too. But he does, though. He, writes stuff, and I guess a lot of his stuff has been dwelling on some of the stuff RFK says and, some other things. But I also think that's maybe where I heard a little bit of a discussion about a third-party candidate, because they were basically saying a third-party candidate doesn't have a shot.
Right.
They were comparing it, to how Ross Perot affected the Bill Clinton race and stuff like that. Right. If I'm remembering correctly. I don't know. They were talking about some of that stuff, something like that. And it was interesting, definitely interesting. The link's going to be there if you guys want to go check that out. But in the end, what's really becomes incendiary in this is they end up going down a certain path, to some of that stuff that you were just alluding to, right? And this guy, PBD, ends up asking Anthony Weiner. He says, my guests have written in, or my subscribers or whatever, my people have written in, and they've wanted me to ask you a couple of questions. And he said, now, I'm not going to go over this one. He talks about it a little bit, even though I'm not going to go over it because I know that that's total garbage. We're not going to do that to you and waste your time. We're not going to go there. And he says, and they also wrote in and they wanted me to do this. And he says, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to go there. Okay? And ignores that. I think it's interesting because the whole dynamic, you'll see, it ends up building up to a certain point. And I don't know that it was exactly handled perfectly on either side. But he does this, the host, PBD. And then he says, but I am going to start asking you about some of this stuff instead. And they end up walking down that lane. And he says, he's trying to make this point. That certain politicians are known for things, like a certain scandal or a certain stain or a certain...
It's synonymous.
...thing that are also known to be true to their personality, true to their behavior. They're things they've been caught for before. They're things they're on record for as being, as people. So he's kind of pressing Anthony on why that might be. Why is that certain, things that are known about people are true? And he's pressing him. He's like, and people know things about you, Anthony. They know that you like to sext people. And they know that you like to, you enjoy the younger people and stuff like this. And he's really asking him these questions. And Anthony's like, I don't know. He just sits there. I don't remember exactly how he reacts. But it's funny to me that it goes that far and they do all that.
Right.
Because then PBD gets where he's really trying to get, which is at the Clintons. He's asking about the Clintons and why on
okay.
earth would it be true that it's basically known to be true, that they have this huge body catalog behind them.
Yeah.
And he reads out the list of like 46 names. And Anthony just gets so mad at some point that he just blows up and walks out of the podcast. Like, he gets mad about it.
What's
But,
there to get mad about if it's not true?
I also think it's interesting because it harkens back to what we were just talking about. He sat there before he blows up and he's just saying, "You're just repeating conspiracy theories and you're not respecting the dead," and all this stuff. And PBD's like, "Well, don't you think their families would want answers?" How am I disrespecting anybody by just asking the question?
Right?
Why is this guy linked to the Clintons with 45 other dudes on a list that's probably printed all over everywhere? There's probably books written about the Clinton body count. I'm pretty sure there are. People have told me. I know there's documentaries. There's all kinds of stuff about the Clintons.
Right? Well, what's his name? Comedian. I just had his name a minute ago. He died relatively recently. Norm Macdonald.
Oh, yeah.
Norm Macdonald joked about this a long time ago. Or like, I don't know if it was The View, some kind of show like that, maybe.
Yeah.
And they got all upset about it.
Uh-huh.
So if comedians are making jokes about it like that, I mean,
It's
back.
pretty what you'd call public knowledge.
Yeah,
I
it
feel
almost,
like.
it very much seems like it's public knowledge.
Right, and
Then they try to pretend it's all conspiracies. That
Conspiracy
vast right-wing
theory.
conspiracy.
Yes,
that's Hillary's phrase. Gosh, yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I just thought that was kind of neat, and those two stories kind
Right.
of harken to each other, and it's all one big trip down memory lane.
Right,
so.
yeah.
Interesting.
It is quite interesting. And speaking of RFK, he seems to be quite the thorn in the Biden campaign's side. Because they're really trying to go after him.
Really?
Well,
Whatever
it
the
seems
vaccine
like.
stuff?
Oh, a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah, just his... I think his most recent thing about the vaccine is he was trying to refer to some studies that tried to show it didn't affect Asians and certain types of Jews.
Oh.
Something like that. And he's saying that people think that's racist and anti-Semitic and anti-Asian.
Is it true?
I don't know.
That's all I want to know.
I don't know. Don't know. But yeah, he's been maintaining like around 20-something% in the polls.
He's definitely interesting.
Yeah. The only thing I think of is when I hear him talk is like, I know you're younger and way healthier. Well, not way healthier, but more relatively healthy than Biden. But dude, you sound terrible.
Yeah.
His voice is terrible. But
I don't think I'd vote for him.
oh no, not me either. But I definitely would like to see him kind of make it hard for the Democrat machine, because they don't want to. Joe Biden doesn't want to have a debate with him and
I wouldn't either.
what's her name?
Uh-huh. Who, Jill?
No, Marianne
Oh, Williamson.
Williamson, yeah. Which she was on Fox News Rundown recently too, and she was rather interesting.
Oh, yeah. She's interesting, all right.
I mean,
I know. She's interesting.
okay, you may seem way more dramatic.
She can be out there. That's all I'll
I'm
say.
sure.
I can show you some videos.
I believe it. You know, I remember her last campaign, but this particular time she wasn't too bad. I enjoyed hearing what she had to say.
I know, she's interesting. I like those spiritual people.
But I think it's going to shape out to be a wild election season.
It sounds
Almost
to
one
me
like
like
no
Trump's
wonder.
gonna win. I hope so.
We'll find out. It's guess depending on what polls you're looking at, definitely seems like it.
Well, I mean, I didn't think of that until we were just saying all these big names and everything and who's running. And you say he's whatever his RFK's polling at 20 and all this. And I'm thinking the Democrats are going to be all over the board. Why wouldn't it just fall right to Trump?
Oh well, I mean, I guess assuming he is on the top of the ticket in the general, yeah,
Yeah.
that definitely makes sense to me.
I definitely just think Biden's name's going to be dragged through the mud. I'm telling you, there's just so much material just since he's been in there.
They already seem sort of to be doing so in some cases.
Well, I hope so. Some of it's obvious. I could write it up for him.
Yeah.
I mean, this cocaine story should have been a much bigger story.
Right?
I can't believe that it's just everybody's gone quiet about it. They had their jokes. Everybody said it's just going to blow over.
Yeah.
And it has.
Yeah. I mean, what are you going to do? The Secret Service said can't figure it out.
Well,
That's
to me,
it?
that's the crime of the millennia.
Yeah.
Because that White House is our house.
Right.
And it has been desecrated
Yeah.
by Biden.
Right. Yeah, definitely. My brother and I recently went to a comedy show, and a couple of the comedians there were even making jokes about it's obvious whose it is.
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, oh man, Nancy Drew's 1-month-old toddler sister could figure that out.
Right? But, alright, well, I'll share one last story real quick before we finish up. Again, I was listening to Fox News Rundown. It's one of my daily podcasts that I listen to. And they were talking about the story about how the commercial office space has been in quite some trouble recently since COVID. Because a lot of people are still working at home or do like a hybrid model where they work at home maybe 2 days out of the week and maybe 3 days in the office. And it's really impacted a lot of commercial office space in big cities. And one of the biggest ones that was pointed out in this episode is in San Francisco. Before the pandemic, they had a vacancy rate of 4.6%, and then since or currently after the pandemic, it's just above 30% of vacancy rate, which is a lot. And I thought that was pretty interesting because also they've talked about, and in other ways we've even talked about, some effects this has on like surrounding businesses. Because if you don't have people filling the office space coming into work, their surrounding businesses like your coffee shops, your whatever,
your lunch places.
Right, exactly. They lose business because there's nobody coming around.
Yeah, at 11 o'clock, the bars get no business. When
Right,
people
exactly.
Yeah.
And also, not only do vacancy rates, or not vacancy rates, but vacancies themselves, the property owners don't collect any revenue.
Right.
After being vacant for so long, the property value itself decreases. And then that also affects property tax receipts and tax collection.
Right.
Which then again turns to less funding for the local city, state department, and all. Not department, but local government.
All the various departments and everything. Yeah.
And it's really quite an issue that seems like it's pretty much here to stay. Because a lot of the big companies are still sticking with the hybrid models, because those who would have had their workers back to the office full time would have done so pretty much by now. And those who haven't. But they also talked about some of the ways that different governments are trying to deal with it, and property
I could
owners.
imagine. I imagine like Seattle just wanting to fill it with homeless right away, or something like that.
Well, yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. But one of the things they were sort of talking about is kind of related to that, but more generally, for housing, some of the office buildings, some places are trying to turn into
Apartments.
Yeah, apartments.
Condos or
Right.
whatever.
Because that is another issue in some of these cities. Also, is the lack of housing. They always want to say lack of affordable housing, which
Right.
I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean, because it means different to different people in different places.
Yeah.
But so hopefully that might help. I just kind of thought that was an interesting story. That I hadn't really thought about the impacts of it too much, because even for me, my day job, I work from home. I used to work in a call center, but of course I'm one of those people that they sent to work from home and never came back. And I'm sure there are probably a lot of other people like me who would probably prefer to work in office.
I
would
definitely
prefer-
like it,
Yeah.
but I couldn't do my work from home though.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely enjoy some of its benefits, but if I really had to choose, I'd go back to the office in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I don't mind the routine and the extra cost.
There's something to it. There's a
Yeah.
human touch, you know.
Exactly, right? Well, that's about all I got for my stories. I thought I'd just share that little last one at the end there.
Well, it's definitely interesting, and I bet there are some clever solutions of how they could fix that problem they've got.
Right. Yeah, the housing thing is one that was mentioned. Some property owners are trying to offer incentives and stuff like that to try to attract
Businesses.
people
and
to
whatever.
come in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully it'll turn around some. It'd be great.
Yep.
And is that all the stuff you got?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio. You can also find the audios on YouTube. And again, if you'd like to support us directly, you can make a donation through Red Circle. All links will be in the show notes and description below.
And wherever you're watching us, I hope you'll maybe give us a like or share us with a friend or two. And as always, thanks for listening.